Hey, welcome everybody. It's No Driving Gloves. You've got John and Will and Derek. We've got all three of us. Will's going to be here short. He's trying to play catch up from running off to Arizona last weekend. Before we get into the thick of the episode, though, hearkening back to last week's episode and Evan's waterless coolant, actually, Chris got back to us with a couple of answers to the questions, and instead of fluffing it up or whatever, let me go ahead and I'm just going to read the email I got pretty much word for word, just give you that update. So getting back to you and Derek regarding the listeners questioning about coolant getting into the bottom end and potentially damaging the bearings. As far as any risk of coolant damaging the bearings via abrasion, well, that really won't be an issue due to the fact that the formula now doesn't consist of any silicates. The glycol actually acts as a lubricant, parentheses 10W oil on parentheses, but obviously is not an oil and shouldn't be used as an oil. Quantity of the coolant in the system will have major effect on the system as well. A pint of coolant in, say, a 6-gallon system won't affect as much, but a gallon, well, that would be another story because that would potentially settle to the bottom end first and risk ruining the oil pump and anything it would pick up. It is always best you guys remove the coolant from the system as soon as possible to eliminate any risks, but going back to Derek's concern about being an abrasive, that won't be a risk without the silicates of the formula. Hope that helps, and thanks. And I think he's talking about if any of the coolant got past the rings or seeped down into the oil pan, and we've started to mix Evan's waterless coolant with the oil and what kind of effect it would have on the white metal. It kind of answers some of those questions, but it kind of still leaves it open. Again, Chris kind of recommended that we look at going to his, talking to their technical people. If you actually are concerned on those levels, check out, evanswaterlesscoolant.com and go ahead and contact their technical people or shoot them off an email, and they will help you with that. So with that kind of stumbling recap of last week, any big exciting things happen for you, Derek?
Big exciting things happened for me over the last week. No, not at all. Not at all. Actually had a weekend. Actually, I've had a couple weekends at home to start working on some home projects, which has been nice because I've been traveling a lot. But other than that, it's been pretty relaxed. So kind of nice.
Week 3 episode, we'll ask the question, any boxes from NASA?
Has the government reopened?
As of recording night, nope. So we fell into that too. We were supposed to go do some maintenance on one of our exhibits in D.C. and just kind of assumed to cancel that trip because they really can't call and tell us not to come either because they're shut down. They're not supposed to go to work. So
very true.
Really an interesting thing, and it's the residual effect. Obviously, there's people in much bigger dire straits and worrying about a couple of exhibits, but just how the little tentacles work their way out. Before we bother Will, we're only going to have him for a couple of minutes tonight. We do have a guest joining us tonight. His name's Brett Hatfield. Actually attended McPherson. It's amazing. We always talk about how networking is. This is networking at its finest. So we have 3 McPherson attendees on the podcast tonight. Brett is a writer, auction analyst for Sports Car Market Magazine. He writes for American Car Collector magazine. He hosts another podcast, The Driven, with Mark Catfish Groves, I think is his co-host at present. And he writes for the website readthedriven.com. Did I get all that right there, Brett?
Yes, sir. You sure did.
Dang, I'm good, and I have no script or notes in front of me.
Wow, look at that.
I remember, sir.
Well, he's got his eyes closed, too.
I have a tendency to speak with my eyes closed, as Scotty D really pointed out. It gets me into the groove. I feel like a rock and roll star.
It's actually just because we also use video to see each other, and he doesn't want to see me or Will in his, on his computer. So
of the 3, he's seen no evil.
Yes.
Right.
And then Brett actually crossed paths with Will this weekend in Arizona. I know it wasn't the weekend you were expecting, Will. Would you want to talk anything about your first experience at Barrett-Jackson? I've been there. Obviously, Brett's been there. Can't remember if Derek's ever been to Barrett-Jackson or any of the Arizona auctions, but
Nope.
That's Derek saying. That's Derek saying nope. Or is that
man? First,
Yeah, no, that was me saying no. I've never been out to the Arizona auctions.
Go ahead, Will.
First, I just want to thank Barrett-Jackson for giving Willie a shot on a Saturday night, and they did everything they could. I know a lot of people saw it on TV, and it appeared to be very short, although it really wasn't. The bidding actually stalled at $90,000. They stopped the auction and talked about the car and everything that the car had won and all the body mods and the hours spent on it, and got it up there a little bit more. So nothing but thanks to Barrett-Jackson for what they did for that dart. I haven't confirmed this, but I'm sure pretty positive that's probably a record for a early A body Mopar. Not really much to complain about there. They did give us.
I'm sorry, Will, but having seen the car in the flesh, I thought it was certainly worth quite a bit more.
I've seen the car a couple of times in person, and it's really a testament, and it proves the timing. I think the car is definitely worth a lot more, especially if it had a 4:30 in the afternoon auction slot as opposed to 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock. I can't remember what time it was in Arizona. And I think that hurt it. It did look like they were rushing the car across the block. And, I've interned for Barrett-Jackson. And, if they give 3 minutes to a car, that is an amazing amount of time. And they kind of rushed it a little bit, but they did pause. They did describe it a little bit more. They modified the auction catalog description prior to Saturday. They did that, and what really amazed me is they milked that car. Like Will said, the bidding stalled at 90, and I thought it was done at 90, and then somehow miraculously they got it to 100 and started to roll it off the block, and they squeezed another $7,000, and there's something there. As Will says, I'll talk bad if I want to talk bad about you and really don't care. Barrett-Jackson's tough, and they'll normally just push that and shove that away, but they worked for that other $7,000, and Barrett-Jackson, that's only a couple $100 for them. But they gave that car, I think, a very fair shake, and unfortunately in an auction, it takes two bidders in the room, and I'm not sure how many people were there that late for a dart, but if I understand correctly, Will's a little bit disappointed as the builder, but I think the owner was happy with what he got out of it.
At the end of the day, it's still a 1965 dart. No matter what's been done to it, it's still a 1965 dart, and it's painted green. Willie was happy with the number. It went to a good home. When the owner of the vehicle is happy, everybody should be happy, no matter what happens. So, and that's what happened. But Barrett-Jackson, the way I've been describing it all week to the guys at the shop was it's a very wealthy man's party with a car auction going on in the background. I felt a little bit out of my element when there's a company there that is vending, that is selling private jets and helicopters. That's something that I'll never be able to afford. I enjoyed looking at it. It was cool. And I'm sure that I'll go back. Probably not next year, but it's something that should definitely be on your bucket list as a car person. And it's very enjoyable. I mean, whether you just sit there and watch the auction or you walk around and look at all of the, I'm going to say crap because a lot of it is crap that they have for sale. Anything from, mattresses to kitchen knives to massage chairs to Learjets, pretty interesting walking around and looking at all that stuff. And then all the cars. And I think we had more fun walking around and seeing what they brought. And then, really looking at the cars then and going, well, why did this car not bring so much? And then you really look at it and it's like, man, that's a pretty good car. And then you look at one that brought, more than the Dart, and I'm walking around it and I'm going, good Lord, there's nothing to this thing. But then again, there was the opposite of that too. A low price was a low end car and a high price was a high end car. So, and like John said, that's the risk you take or the reward you get when you go to auction.
I've always found Barrett-Jackson or any auction that you go to, I think they're the best car shows in the world to go to. And, go to Barrett-Jackson, and I don't know what a ticket for that costs. It's been a few years since I've been there, $50, $100. Best car show you'll go to. And then, of course, there's always that fantasy that if you really wanted to, unlike most car shows, you can take that car home with you. Say the funny side, Will, is I was out Saturday with a friend of mine and asked him a question, and he said, oh, no, I sold that a couple of years ago. Matter of fact, I sold my jet on Friday, so I guess.
Yeah, there you go.
So,
well, you're right about it being one of the best shows you can go to. Is you get if you're really interested in a car, you can hear it run. You can watch them drive it. No, you're not going to see them go 80 down the interstate. In a setting like that, it's tougher on a vehicle than going down the interstate. It's crank it up, move it, crank it up, move it, crank it up, move it, crank it up, move it. It takes a pretty well built car to take that kind of a beating, heat soaking and then cranking them up. But I'll tell you, Barrett-Jackson does one hell of a job, with mechanics out there in the line before they go up on the block to make sure the batteries are charged. And, we've seen some crazy crap happen. Matter of fact, something a little goofy happened with the Dart that I was able to get fixed really quick. It was nothing major, but it's pretty interesting to see people hustling around in that line to get the car up on the block. Because once it goes across the block, it ain't theirs. It's not their problem anymore.
Yeah, I interned there back when I was at McPherson. I don't know if you remember me going in January, and it was the hardest week I've probably ever worked in my life. At the time, Drew Alcazar, who now owns Russo Steely, and I know Brett knows very well, he was kind of the Steve Davis of Barrett-Jackson. I think he was an executive vice president or president of Barrett-Jackson at the time, and I kind of answered to him. And I mean, I think I pulled in and I checked into my hotel, and I was told to call him the moment I got there. And I called him at 2:30 in the morning. He said, "Can you come on down?" I just got out of the car after 12 hours. I said, "Can I get there a little bit later?" He goes, "Be here at 5." And it was almost 5 a.m. to the time I left a week later, just working that auction week. And it was amazing, how much behind the scenes and what I learned doing that. I'll be honest, I left and I was cussing Drew, but over the years I've bumped into him once or twice and seen him, what he's built with his wife and his auction. I really have respect for that man. And any of those guys, we can critique Craig, and I mean, he made a couple of bucks and he's been very successful at the auctions. And I think he helped build Arizona to what it is in January. It's definitely.
I think that's absolutely true.
It's definitely a different climate than when you go to a Bonhams or a Gooding auction. But to each his own. And there's there was a white and blue Ford GT. I think at Gooding in Arizona, there was a white and blue Ford GT at Barrett-Jackson. So just what party do you want to be at? And I think Will's really correct in that it's a party with rich kids and rich guys, and they, they're just exchanging cars. What's your take on auctions there, Brett?
I've been several times, although I hadn't been for a few years. And when I went to see Will Saturday, my goodness, is that
I was going to say, let's interrupt real quick here. Will's taking off for the night. He's got to get back to the shop. So
thank you, guys.
Well, it was good to see you.
You too. Talk to you guys next week. See ya.
Thanks for squeezing us in tonight, Will.
I hadn't been to Barrett-Jackson for several years. This was the first time I'd gone over there in an auto journalist capacity. I'd always been there as either a spectator or a bidder before. It has at least doubled in size in the last 10 years, at a minimum. I couldn't get around to all of it in one afternoon. There's just so much stuff there. Yeah, apparently they've got their business model figured out.
I can't remember. Are they in a tent, or did is it I want to say Westworld, but
it's at Westworld, and they've got several tents. They've also got what looks like a semi-permanent structure there now.
Yeah, because at one time I believe he was holding that auction in the largest tent in the world. It was like 1 million square feet, which even our museum is only it's 223,000 square feet, and it's huge. I just can't believe.
And that's a big building.
I can't believe you're dealing with 1 million square foot tent.
Auction, I don't think it's a tent. It seemed to have a semi-permanent structure to it, but maybe they take it down afterward. I'm not sure.
I can't remember. I think he asked, and I think a permanent-ish structure was constructed, and maybe they expanded. Even the tent 15 years ago looked like a building, and you can't believe it came down. But
yeah. Well, I first started going to Barrett-Jackson in the mid-'90s, and at that time, the entrance let you into the hall where all the displays were and all the vendors were. And then you came into the auction tent, and then a few years later, they added another tent on the backside of that for featured lots. And it's grown from that. Now, when you enter, you come into a hall where there are manufacturer displays, and then it's too big to be a kiosk. It's where they're selling all the Barrett-Jackson merchandise. Then you go to the auction tent, and on the other side of it is a tent that is combined featured lots and hundreds of vendors. And you walk outside, and there's hundreds more vendors. It's cars and food, and we were discussing earlier. Superformance had their tent out there, and McGuire's had their setup out there. And it has gotten to be absolutely ginormous. It's huge. You can't take it all in one day.
Kind of like SEMA in Arizona, I guess.
Yeah, kind of like, and it's in pretty stark contrast to other auctions. Drew Alcazar has a good size auction. Russo at Scottsdale, I think they had 800 cars there this year. And they do have giant outside tents with all of the cars in them. And then they've got an auction tent. And it's a fraction of the size of Barrett-Jackson. Drew's is a different kind of auction. But I really enjoy both of them. They're a lot of fun. Working for the magazines, I'm an auction analyst for both the Sports Car Market and American Car Collector. And I get to travel around and see how different auction companies do different things. When I cover Mecum, Kansas City, they come to Bartle Hall. They come to a giant exhibition hall and do their auction there. That's all indoor, fixed facility, that sort of thing. It's kind of fun to see the differences between the sales. I
was going to spin it a little bit, maybe get Derek into the conversation. We've looked at and we've talked on the show about the Tupelo Auto Museum. Is beginning to a wind down stage, and we'll be going to auction. Derek has mentioned he's interested in some lots, and I don't know what Derek's auction experience is. And actually, I've kind of talked to a couple of other people that are interested in the Tupelo. Do you have any comments on say that, or are you going to attend that one?
Are you talking to me or Brett?
Whoever talks first.
Oh, okay. I still plan on attending. Hopefully, that doesn't mean people are going to go and bid against me if I bid on anything.
It's like that hot dog job to drive the Wienermobile right now. I really want to apply for it, but so many people have shared it on Facebook.
Oh, go for it.
You're hurting my chances. If you're really not interested in the job, don't share it. Quit sharing it.
John, did you see that the Wienermobile was in Kansas City last week during an ice storm and ran into the back of another car?
No, I missed that one. It actually was in Birmingham a week or two ago. I saw it running down the interstate here on my way home one night. So
maybe there must be more than one Wienermobile.
Well, maybe that's why they're hiring somebody new. It's like a UPS driver. You crash once, you're done.
On the Tupelo auction, I'm friends with a gentleman named Ward Morgan, who's opening a car museum in Manhattan, Kansas, called the Midwest Dream Car Collection. Ward and I keep running into each other at different auctions and stuff like that. We were hanging out. He bought a Mustang Mach 1 R-Code car. And so last year, while we were sitting around drinking beer, I saw the Tupelo thing come up, and I've encouraged Ward to go, but I don't know if he's still buying cars or not. He's getting close to 70 cars in his museum, and I think it's more than he's going to be able to display at any one time.
I'll play off that one a little bit. Derek, how many cars do you display in your museum? Do you know, or on average? I know you're always rotating exhibits, but...
On average, right around 70, but that includes cars that are in on loan as well.
Yeah, I always joke about that, about barbers. I guessed it actually on Brett's show. We just, about an hour and a half ago, I was doing the interview with Brett for his podcast. So you can go ahead and check me out if you really want to over the Driven. I'm not sure when that episode will release, but we'll keep you updated.
Should be around Friday afternoon.
Well, there you go there. But it was, I talked about the 1,700 motorcycles we have in our museum, and people forget that we have 100 cars represented and usually 70 cars on display at any given time. 60 or so of them are actually Lotus cars. But we're known as a motorcycle museum, and we have a collection that is the same size as a lot of car museums. I just always find that it's so easy to lose 70 cars behind 1,000 or 1,700 motorcycles. It's interesting. One of my little personal things, but
yeah, very true. And the Corvette Museum, our collections stands at about 85 cars. The collection of the museum itself, which of course you take away some of the cars we have on loan that are on display, and we probably display 55 to 65 museum-owned cars, and then the others are special vehicles in on loan from private owners, General Motors, other museums, things like that. The funny thing that I think a lot of people don't understand is it's pretty common in the museum world for 30% of your artifacts to be on display and 70% to be in storage. That's kind of a running percentage average, let's call it, of amount of items that you display. And that's just because exhibit space, you want to have one artifact have a fair amount of space around it so people can actually see it. Whereas in storage, you can store things a lot closer together. So the bulk of your collection typically is in storage.
I agree with you there. I think we actually run about the opposite. I think we have a little over 1,000 of the 1,700 motorcycles on display, and we have a good majority of the cars, like I said, anywhere between 60 and 70 with 30 or so. So we probably run the exact opposite. We have 70% on display and 30% in storage, but...
Well, and you guys don't have a lot of small artifact collections. You don't have a lot of that kind of little memorabilia or parts or things that are considered artifacts that don't always make it out. So
we're good on the big displays, not the little, but I'll just let you know we're competing with you guys. We just built a wall, and we acquired a collection of 9,000 Lotus models last year, and we should have 4,000 to 5,000 of those on display. So
there you go.
You guys, have 600 Corvette models on display, and that kind of leading into, that's a new exhibit you have, I think I saw? Not that we're promoting our museums, but...
I don't know what you saw, John, but no.
Oh, I thought you had some little models or something on display, like going into the new children's area or something.
We do. We have a portion of it was roughly a 700 models collection that was donated, but it's a small portion of that's on display.
Okay.
So it's not the entire 700 cars, model cars on display. It's a portion of them.
Okay. Maybe I misunderstood.
So anyway, back to auctions, seeing that's where we were. I do plan on hopefully making the Tupelo auction. Of course, that one's, if I remember right, going through Sotheby's. We can imagine probably what some of the prices are going to be. But, and as for my auction experience, I actually bought my 1917 Overland Model 90 Roadster through an auction. We won't mention what auction house it was, but I knew the people who were running the auction, who worked for the auction company, things like that. And needless to say, came down to there were some auction tactic used that I was not pleased with, and had long conversations with them about what I would actually pay for the car. Not a huge fan of auctions. I like the private sale situation better, where you can actually sit down and talk about the value of the car and do some bartering and bickering on how much you're going to pay and all those good things. And I'm not a huge fan of large crowds, so something like the Barrett-Jackson Westworld auction, not always a situation I always like to put myself in, because me and big crowds, I just get uncomfortable. So,
well, now that we took all the wind out of Brett's sails, let's shift gears here a little bit, and let's talk about Brett's collector car collection. Or I think he mentioned that he has a couple of cars. And what kind of where'd you start with your car collection? Not necessarily what you still owned, or what got you into the automobile, and what put you on this career path to,
I was a car guy from the jump, just like so many of us. I loved cars when I was a little kid, and always had a fascination with the idea of being able to get in one and go fast. I mean, I probably started with big wheels as far as that goes. When I was 10 years old, I mowed enough lawns in the neighborhood to save up part of the money to buy a go-kart, and my dad and grandfather matched the rest of it, wound up buying a go-kart for my 10th birthday. And, go-karts, dirt bikes. My dad owned a lumber yard, so I learned how to drive manual transmission stuff really early, starting with forklifts and lumber trucks when I was 13. I graduated from high school, and I've written a story about this on The Driven, so you can look it up. Through high school, I'd had several cars. One of them was a Camaro, and I'd gone out and tried to get in every kind of trouble I possibly could, and accomplished that fairly well, and had gotten a dump truck load full of tickets I hadn't told my dad about. And I just paid them off, and I thought, okay, that'll go away. And for graduation, I got out of high school on a plea bargain. No one was more surprised than my old man, and he was going to let me go pick out a new car. So he gave me a budget and a couple other parameters and said, okay, go find something. And I was looking at 1988 RX-7 GTUs, which would have been a second generation RX-7. And the GTU was the super lightweight version. And I figured, okay, it'll be great. It'll be light. So the power will seem more useful. It'll go around corners. And I found that, and I came back to my dad, and I said, this is what I found, and this is what I want. And it's under budget, so what do you think? And he called his insurance guy. The insurance guy checked my my driving record and started laughing at my dad over the phone and said, the kid's got so many tickets, it's probably going to cost about $3,000 a year to insure him. For that kind of money, he might as well be driving a Corvette. And Dad had a 60 Corvette in an airplane hangar, and he'd bought it 4 years before. I helped him find the car, and he was really mad at me, but you could kind of see the gears start turning. And he looked at me and said, so would you rather drive that old Corvette I got? And I said, absolutely. And that's how a skinny, probably spoiled and not real bright kid from Kansas wound up with a vintage Corvette.
Now,
and the car was...
I'm going to interrupt there. So the moral of your story is, when you're 16, go out and get a bunch of tickets and get rewarded by not getting a brand new car and be given a 60 Corvette. Because Dad's not mad. Dad's okay with $3,000 a month or $3,000 a year insurance.
No. Dad was furious. Dad was fuming. But the Corvette was under a blanket policy with all the other cars we owned through the company. He could kind of get around having me insured and not shell out all the money for the new car, and save himself the $15,000 by giving up a car that he didn't drive. It kind of depends on how you look at it.
Now, I think you won on just about every aspect of that deal.
Oh, are you kidding me? I'm the luckiest SOB walking. I just flat am. And the car was so cool, and it was always so much fun to drive and own that I never got rid of it. And, I'm 31 years on the road. I didn't own that car. So that was the first collector car I ever had, and I just never sold it.
Yeah, I don't think that RX-7 would still be around.
No. I think that RX-7 probably would have been wadded out. By having Dad give me an underpowered base engine Corvette with a power glide probably saved my life. There's a pretty good chance I would have gone out and done heinous things in the RX and whoever else was in the car with me. But I've got that old Corvette. I've got a 61 Impala hot rod with a 409 and two 4-barrels and a 4-speed. It's the Beach Boys song. And a 63 Impala convertible and an old Bronco that I'm sitting in right now.
What era Bronco?
It's a 1990, but it's a 2-owner truck. My brother-in-law bought it new, and I spent 5 years trying to talk him out of it. And 3 years ago, he sold it to me. It's got 59,000 miles on it. Never seen any rust. It's just a great old truck.
So do you just drive old cars, or do you? I'm sitting here. We're sitting here on January 23rd. I think it just recently snowed in Kansas, and you're in your.
It did.
30-year-old Bronco. Do you have anything modern, or do you just drive classics?
No, I've got a 99 Navigator that's got 271,000 miles on it. That's what I drive most of the time. But until about a month ago, I also ran a property management and watched over a bunch of condos and commercial properties that we owned here in town. And so I had to have that Navigator. It was my practical vehicle, throw tools in the back, throw materials in the back, haul a trailer, all that garbage. Now I don't really have a job that requires I drive anything in particular, so I get to drive what I want. My wife's daily is a red over red 05 GTO. So with the weather being crummy like it is, I let her take the Navigator, and I've been driving my old Bronco.
I'm going to go somewhere. You tell me if I overstep my bounds.
Wait, I need to know if the Bronco is the Bronco white?
No, sir.
Oh, okay.
It's black and gray.
All of a sudden, I've got a picture of my old Hot Wheels black Bronco with the kind of faded orange 70s retro graphics. I don't know if you remember that.
Oh, yeah.
And I had that Bronco. I'm still looking for that Bronco.
That Hot Wheel?
Yeah, I want to find one of those and paint it like my truck.
Oh, John still has it.
I was going to say, I think I have it in. It's probably in my warehouse, but I guarantee you, I still have that Bronco. I also have, I think, a white one. Maybe I'll have to drop you something in the mail. It's cold here, though.
What do you? What would you like to know, sir?
Wasn't there a certain 05 GTO that was kind of stranded somewhere on its way to Arizona in the snow recently?
Yeah, I stole the wife's car to go to Arizona because I thought, hey, the weather will be nice. It'll be fun to have a hot rod down there. And then I got stuck in a snowstorm in the Mogollon Rim in Arizona. I wound up having to stay in a less than fantastic hotel, but any port in a storm.
First time I was in Arizona in '85 with the family, we loaded up our Dodge 600 ES convertible and drove from Illinois, and we went Oklahoma, blah, 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 all the way out to I think we went Vegas and Tahoe and then made our way back. It snowed in Arizona, and I just never comprehended that it would snow in Arizona. And
you come to understand that those Arizona mountains look a heck of a lot like Colorado mountains, and they have similar weather.
Very, very true. And when you're coming from Kansas, they just never seem to arrive. Because I think you drove from, I think you're in the Kansas City area, if I remember right. And
I am.
I drove, obviously, from McPherson out to Arizona, and I did that I had a sort of 97 Dodge long bed extended cab pickup, and you're running 80, 85 miles an hour through the mountain roads. That truck just didn't quite handle that very well. It was kind kind of white-knuckle driving on that trip.
Oh, I believe it. Fortunately, the GTO, as long as it's not snowing, that car handles really well. All the power you're ever going to need, and it runs healthy.
Derek's a former GTO owner, kind of a different era.
GTO guy. My very first car was a 1974 Pontiac GTO. On my bucket list of cars to own is a what I like to call the Holden, crossover GTO, the 05-06 era GTO. So someday I'll have one.
They are fantastic cars, and you got to give it up to Holden. They have great seats. The seats are really comfortable. And as a testament to that, coming back from Scottsdale, I did Scottsdale to Kansas City in 17 hours. And I wasn't sore when I got out. That's really saying something.
I'm too old to do 17 hours in a one trip.
Well, it was 1,200 miles in 17 hours. We were making good time. I was making a good time.
He didn't even stop for dinner or bathroom breaks.
If you can't do it while I'm getting gas, you don't get to do it.
I've learned to travel a little bit more casually with some additional breaks. Drives me crazy sometimes, but there's also some rewards, I guess, to be had. Stop and smell the roses.
I can appreciate that. I have 2 daughters and a wife, and we've done a road trip from Kansas City to, my folks used to have a house in Tucson. Doing the trip from Kansas City to Tucson with the family and the little dog that's got a thimble bladder took 2 days, as opposed to the 7-hour run I would have made. It's a lot more comfortable to do it that way, but I want to get where I'm going. I want to get there. And it was just...
Say, I kind of totally understand that, but that's going to lead to my next question. And talking with you is, you're racing back from Arizona to go to your, I guess, dream job for a lot of car people, to write some articles on what you saw at Arizona. How do you work your way into becoming an auction analyst for Sports Car Market magazine, or, if I want to grow up and do that?
It was a goof. Like we talked, I've been a Sports Car Market subscriber for a long time, and an American Car Collector subscriber, and a Corvette collector subscriber before that. And about 4.5 years ago, Sports Car Market sent an email to all their subscribers that said, "Have you ever wanted to be an auction analyst?" I write fairly well, but I didn't have any kind of a background for it. I don't have a journalism degree, and I'd never written for anything that was published. But so I was looking at the email, and like I said, I had a full-time job doing property management. And I thought, shoot, I'm never going to get this. And my wife really pushed me to send a reply in. And I sent one in. I said, I'm very interested in doing this. I'm reasonably literate. I can write, and I would like to do so. And I sent the reply in. I didn't hear anything for a year. And then one of their editors, a guy named Tony Piff, who is no longer with the magazine, sent me an email back about a year later saying, "Are you still interested in doing this?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Okay, there's an auction, there's a lake auction coming up in Dallas. Go cover it." And I'm not kidding. I didn't get a whole lot more instruction than that. They said, "You'll need a camera better than your phone. Go down there, review 50 cars, come back. We'll put 25 of them in Sports Car Market. We'll put 25 of them in American Car Collector. You'll need a lead-in article for each magazine. Go down there and cover it." And the rest of it was just, it was trial by fire. I went down there. I hauled way too much gear around with me on the first auction. I had a messenger bag full of all kinds of papers. Here's the cars I thought I was going to review before I came to the auction, and dragged a camera around with a tripod. Just way too much stuff. So the first auction taught me, one, how to choose cars and review them once you get there. Because picking them from online pictures or from a catalog, you don't know what the car's really like. Two, it taught me that one of the most important things about covering these auctions is traveling light. Take a camera, take a small pad of paper and a pen so you can write down what you've covered. And I take a digital voice recorder. When I get there, I take pictures of the car, and then I walk around the car and I just kind of talk my way through the car's condition. This is what the paint looks like. Has it had decent prep? Was the application okay? Is there orange peel to it? Are there scratches in the paint? Does it feel rough to the touch? Does it have overspray on it? How does the chrome look? Has it been done recently? Are there buffer marks on the chrome? Has it been scraped or bumped up? Same thing with the stainless, the glass, the weather strip. And you kind of work your way through the car. Is the engine bay clean? Are there aftermarket parts on it? What's the interior look like? All of these things. And you have to do all that stuff on every car. You do that 50 times, you got enough to do articles for 2 magazines.
You make it sound like work.
It is work. But it's work that I happen to enjoy a lot. It is a lot of fun. And the other thing is, if you've got a good memory for cars, and, most of us car guys do, you'll remember when you see the car again someplace else, if you see it in another venue, if you see it at another auction, or if you see it online someplace, or if you see it on eBay or on Hemmings. And it's funny how many cars I've reviewed from auctions pop up on Bring a Trailer. If you are a Bring a Trailer follower, and I know a lot of us are, every now and then you'll see some schmuck called Red Vet 1960 on there saying, I reviewed this car for Sports Car Market. Well, that's me.
I do believe I've seen your handle. Mine on there is Spare Car. And, I kind of get that way, and usually I'm commenting on some Lotus piece and that.
Well, I'll know to watch for you now.
Say it's kind of an interesting thing. I know the job application type thing you're talking about, because I think I filled out 2 of those so far for barn finds, and still don't have any agreement they won't call me back.
Yeah, I did one with barn finds too, and they didn't contact me, and I also did one for Bring a Trailer, and they didn't contact me. So, like I said, I just kind of fell into working for the 2 magazines, but Keith and everybody at the magazines, and this is where I get to brag people up, Chester Allen, Jim Pickering, and Chad Tyson have all been really fantastic to work for and work with. And they've been very helpful with things as we've gone along. And also Darren Frank is great to work with, Cindy Meidel, and everybody at the magazine has been a lot of fun to be around. And we do get together at big gatherings. We got together last year out at Monterey, and it's just fun to get everybody in one place at one time. And it's a neat team to work with. I do enjoy it. And, for a guy who loves cars and loves to be around them, it is kind of a dream job. I get paid to write about other people's stuff.
I guess it does sound kind of cool. And if anybody now knows, you just got to wait for that email. Subscribe to Sports Car Market for 30 years and see when they ask.
Go right ahead. I was just going to say, I got really lucky. I know how lucky I am. I know how fortunate I am. And covering the auctions is work. You also feel like you have a real hand in letting people know what's going on in our world. And I think we've all, you and I discussed this, John. We all feel like we want to preserve and educate people to the collector car community and hope that we can get future generations interested in it. Because if we don't all work together, this will go away. It can go away. I don't think any of us want to lose it.
Okay, so I've got to ask you, Brett, just because you brought that up. And one of my issues with auctions, and maybe it's founded, maybe it's unfounded. You talk about getting young kids involved, stuff like that. And there's a lot of times that, you look at the auctions and the things that are going on, And it makes it really tough for the prices that these cars go for that sometimes are just really probably overinflated prices at these auctions. I mean, it really makes it hard for kids to get in. I mean, what is your take on that, being an auction analyst? I mean, I guess it's always bothered me.
What we're starting to see now and what is happening is that the super expensive blue chip cars, the stuff that you see more commonly at Gooding or at RM Sotheby's, will always be super expensive blue chip cars. Vintage racing Ferraris are always going to command a heck of a premium. You're never going to see Ferrari 250 GTOs selling in the $100,000 neighborhood again. It's not going to happen. But what we are seeing as a trend now, as later Gen Xers and millennials are getting into the collector car world, the cars that are selling more commonly are $30,000 to $40,000 cars. You're not seeing as many six-figure cars go across a block, or you're not seeing them command the prices they were. The resto mods are more popular right now, but that's mostly for older Gen Xers and baby boomers who still like their old cars, but they want air conditioning, they want power windows, they want nice radios in them. The cars that we're starting to see collectors in their 30s look for, look how hot square body trucks are from GM, Ford, and Dodge. And look at second-gen Camaros are starting to find their legs. Third-gen Corvettes are starting to become more popular. Stuff that sells in the $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 range is starting to have a lot more following than stuff that sells in the $100,000 to $200,000 range. The prices are coming down, and we're getting younger people involved. And I'm excited by that. I hope that continues to be a trend.
So do you think the auction houses are ready for that? Because obviously when they start selling those lower value cars, they're not really making as much money.
I think that you'll see auction houses trying to continue to appeal to sellers who have really expensive cars. But at some point, you have to serve the demand. And if the demand is in that $30,000 to $40,000, $50,000 range, you'll have to make adjustments to serve it. You can't dictate to the customer what they're going to buy and sell. You're going to have to follow the demand. There's going to be adjustment that has to be made. But by the same token, as collectors get, the same thing is going to happen with the next generation as happened with our generation. As collectors get older, they earn more money and they go look for, their tastes evolve and they go look for other things. There's going to be a generational shift. I don't see any of the auction houses going under. I just think that there's going to be a change in what's selling and what's worth more money. One of the things that we're seeing now is we're seeing prices soften on some things that used to be considered very collectible cars. Tri-5 Chevys are going down in value. You don't see as many really radical 55, 56, 57 Chevrolet resto mod builds or restorations. They're just not as common right now because the demand isn't there. You're seeing prices soften on mid-year Corvettes. Not tons, but a little bit. And I think that's going to continue to be a factor. There are certain things that will always have cachet. Corvettes always will, but I don't think that the current or the next generation is going to feel like they've got such a tie to the mid-years and the solid axles as they did before, as the previous generation did.
I was going to ask you, Brett, let's talk a little bit about readthedriven.com and the Driven podcast and that. Looking at your site, it's kind of funny. It looks like you kind of started Read the Driven April of 2018, so just a couple months before we actually launched this podcast. Is that correct, or does it just not date back that far?
No, that is correct. I found that I had things that I wanted to write about and things I wanted to discuss other than just auctions. And that's kind of where Read the Driven came in. I wanted to start a website, hopefully grow it into something that would be more than just the auction coverage. And the radio show, or the podcast that's about to be a terrestrial radio show, that started, my co-host Mark, he and I had a mutual friend And through that mutual friend, we met and started talking. And, for good or ill, I can't talk very long without bringing up car stuff. And Mark had the idea of having a car-based radio show for 5 years. And the longer we talked, the more it became evident that we should try to do that. And that's why the podcast now is formatted like a radio show, because the end goal was always to get it on the air. And we're about to do that. We're a couple months away. Having a podcast gave us the opportunity to kind of hammer out the details and get the format down for the show and figure out how we were going to do it. Now, I think our podcast sounds a lot better than most, and that's entirely because of Mark. He's been in radio for 30 years. He really knows what he's doing, and he's responsible for our sound. And he's taught me a lot, and in the meantime, I've got 6 months worth of free education on how to do a radio show. We're about to make that, well, it's not going to be a transition. We're going to continue to be a podcast, but we're also going to have a commercial radio show on in Kansas City.
I think I discussed with you when we started chatting, I wanted to do a podcast because I can say what I want and do what I want. And then shortly after we started this, we explored radio. We were approached by a station, and I just didn't like some of the limitations it provided. But you went in with that thought process, and I really had to ask you if you had a radio show, because you guys do it so well. The audio's there, the edits, the way you lay out the show. And frankly, I think your show is really good. You've gotten some excellent guests over the years, or not years, over you're in your second season. You've kind of relaunched with a new name. It used to be Road Muscle Radio, and now it's The Driven. I'll be honest, I think it's a good podcast. It's, one reason we're spending an hour with you tonight, and I thank you for letting me spend a half hour with you earlier tonight.
Well,
I was going to come. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say I very much appreciate that. Thank you. And again, Mark is the reason the show sounds the way it does. He is the genius behind all of that. I'm just the car guy on the show. But much like you said about the networking and the collector car community, it's because of being at McPherson and all the people that I've met through that, and then really working for Keith at Sports Car Market and American Car Collector, that I've gotten to be around all these people, and I've gotten to meet all these people. So going back to the magazine thing, I got to thank Keith and everybody at the magazines for making this into a dream job. I would have never met a lot of the people I've gotten to over the last few years if it hadn't been for that. Really, I got to give it up to the guys at the magazine and the staff there, and I got to give it up to Mark. I got a lot of people who have made me look awful good and given me a lot of opportunities.
Well, that's something I mentioned on your podcast, and we mention quite often on here. It's, one of the reasons I think we do the podcast is we want to expand the hobby and teach people. But in order to do that, we have to network. And these podcasts, I'm not sure what your listeners and your downloads are. And, ours are finally getting to be about the goals where I wanted to be. It takes some time. But it allows us this networking. And, this year we've had a lot more guests now that I've upgraded equipment. And we've got some really exciting guests lined up over the next couple of weeks, too, on this podcast. So I think it's a great networking thing. And if anybody wants to be on your show or wants to be on our show, send me a message. And hey, if you want to be on Brett's, I'll send them your way.
Well, I'm easy to track down. I'm Brett at readthedriven.com. But I'm honored that you would have me on, and I thank you for coming on our show as well.
Well, I'm going to throw out one last thing and go into the Driven and clicking all the way back to April 16th, 2018. Your first article or first post on the Driven. Do you remember what that was about?
I'm wondering if it wasn't the 10 days of affordable exotics.
No, this was it kind of ties into you and Derek and etc. The 1959 Corvette, and I'll always screw up
Galietti.
Yep, I'll always screw up any coach builder's name except Fisher, maybe. Ironically, we've I think we touched on your show and we touched a little bit here. When I interned at Barrett-Jackson back in 2000, that car, the red car, I think there's 8 of these?
3.
They had a red...
3.
A red one was there. And I got to drive that car across the block.
Wow. Okay, well, I'm hugely envious.
It's kind of one of those cool things is, back when I did it, nobody wanted to drive their cars across the block. It was the early days of Barrett-Jackson on Speed Vision. And then all of a sudden it seemed to be a big thing. And I'll be honest, I haven't watched Barrett-Jackson on TV the last couple of years. Been very busy in January. And this year, obviously, with Will's car and that, I paid a lot closer attention. And it didn't seem that, that was such a big deal anymore to the owners as going across the block and being on TV. But I was just going to say, it's kind of odd to me that this Corvette you have and Derek's with his, Corvette. And, just one of those, the small world we all live in. But that was an interesting car to drive, and I feel privileged to have gotten the opportunity to drive it all, 1 mile.
I feel you were privileged to drive it too.
There were some other ones.
That's amazing.
There were some others that year that it kind of makes up for, but.
Wow. Hey, I understand a gentleman who lives in Arizona owns that red car.
Couldn't tell you, but I'll go with what you say.
But that's staggering. There's only 3 of them left. There's only 3 of them, period. They only built 3 in the first place. And in fact, the article I wrote about that Scaglietti, when I posted it, was kind of just a what if article. That was Carroll Shelby and a couple other gentlemen approaching GM trying to get Chevrolet to allow them to build that car before the Cobra existed. The what if part of it was, what if Chevrolet had said yes? Think of the unbelievable change to automotive history that would have been. There would have been no Cobras. And as a result, there would have been no Cobra Daytonas, no GT40s, Ford and Ferrari. I don't know if Ford ever would have won a Le Mans like they did. And there would have been so many careers that didn't happen because of that. So
I always look at the other door. What if it would have? What would have happened in the careers that didn't happen because it didn't happen and things like that? It's the what ifs are always fun, and that's that could be a whole episode just to sit around. It's one of those things that you just sit around, have a beer, and you go.
Oh, I think that. I think you probably need a piece of poster board to keep track of all of it by the time you get done.
Look like one of those math equations that physicists come up with trying to flow chart it out in that. But I think with that, I say go ahead, check out Brett on the Driven, readthedriven.com. I'm sure your podcast is available on all the podcast catchers, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts.
Yes, sir.
So
it certainly is.
And if you're in the Kansas City area, I think pay attention to your radio dial, and he'll come to you at least once a week. We'll see what that format plays out. I'm sure they'll keep us updated.
Coming up pretty soon.
Well, we thank you for your time, Brett. I know Derek's actually got to run off and go back to work. He's actually working tonight after the recording, too. So,
gentlemen, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much, and be happy to talk to you anytime.
Yeah, pleasure meeting you, Brett, and I look forward to chatting with you down the road.
I'm going to say thank you, and I'm going to get out of here, too.
I'll give you a holler in May.